people can put the exact same money into their 401k for the exact same 30 years and retire more than $500,000 apart. Not because one timed the market, not because one found a secret investment, because one stayed in the fund their employer chose automatically and the other checked what that fund was actually doing. Most people assume their 401k default is basically the market on autopilot. But autopilot isn't neutral. It picks a fee, and it picks a stock and bond mix that can quietly cost you far more than you'd guess. I'm Amy. I modeled the real cost of 401k autopilot, and the part that surprised me was this: fees matter, but they're not the big number. First, I'll show you the fee gap almost nobody checks. Then the much bigger number hiding behind it, a choice baked into your default fund. By the end, you'll know exactly what to check in your own plan. Stick around to the end. I'll give you the 3-question test before switching anything: the fee, the stock allocation, and whether a lower cost index option is even in your plan. Here's why this applies to you specifically, even if you've never thought about your 401k once. In 2024, 61% of employer plans offered automatic enrollment, up from just 10% 2 decades ago. When a plan enrolls you automatically, you didn't pick a fund. A form got signed, a payroll deduction started, and a fund got chosen for you. And 98% of plans that default participants this way use the same type of investment, a target date fund, the kind named after the year you turn roughly 65. That doesn't make the default suspicious. Target date funds are one of the standard qualified default investment options plans use when a worker makes no active choice. And starting in 2025, automatic enrollment became mandatory for most new employer plans, so even more people will be opted into this exact setup without ever choosing. The problem isn't that something bad happened, it's that most people never go back and check what safe default actually contains. And after 30 years of contributions, never checked gets expensive. The belief exists for a good reason. A target date fund sounds like it's just the market on autopilot. You contribute, it invests broadly, it gets more conservative as you age. In the simple version of the story, that's basically the same as owning an index fund, just with training wheels. And for a lot of people, most of the time, that's roughly true. Target date funds are diversified. They rebalance automatically. They're built by people who study this for a living. And the whole point of the fund is to remove decisions from your plate. So keep this in mind before we get to any scary numbers. Nothing I'm about to show you means the target date fund is broken or that someone got cheated. The issue is narrower than that. Autopilot hides 2 things most participants never look at, like what the fund costs and what it's actually invested in. Both compound quietly for decades, and by the time you'd notice, most of the difference is already locked in. Here's the part I expected to matter most: fees. The average target date fund charges about 0.27% a year. A plain S&P 500 index fund charges somewhere around 0.03% to 0.04%. On a monthly statement, that gap is invisible. A few dollars, easy to ignore. But compounded over 30 years of steady contributions at historical market returns, that fee difference alone works out to roughly $70,000 less at retirement. I call this the autopilot tax, the fee you never see because nobody sends you a bill for it. $70,000 is real money. But then I found something much bigger, and it isn't the fee at all. A target date fund isn't just the stock market on autopilot. It's a portfolio that gradually moves away from stocks and toward bonds as you age. Its glide path starts around 90% stocks in your 20s, then shifts toward bonds every year after that, regardless of how you personally feel about risk. A 100% equity index fund does not do this. It stays fully invested in stocks the entire time, so you're not comparing 2 versions of the same investment. You're comparing 2 different risk decisions. And before I show you what that's worth, let me be clear about what's being compared. Same monthly contribution, same 30-year career, same tax treatment inside the 401k. The only differences are the fee and the stock-to-bond mix. Not stock picking, not market timing. This isn't a trading strategy. It's the same money, invested 2 different ways. Modeled across 30 years, the average target date fund spends the accumulation period holding roughly 70% stocks and 30% bonds, not 90, not 100. Bonds have earned less than stocks for decades. Blend that lower returning asset in for 30 years, and the allocation difference alone is worth about $498,000. Add the fee gap, and the total model difference comes to roughly $545,000. Now, the fair objection, and it's a good one, of course, the index fund wins in the model. It's taking more risk. Exactly, that's the point. The target date fund isn't secretly broken. It's quietly choosing less risk for you over time. The problem isn't that it makes that choice. It's that most people never realize a choice was made. That's the myth I'd call the autopilot illusion. So here's the part that keeps this from being a scare story. That $498,000 allocation gap is not a mistake. It's the entire point of a target date fund. Bonds exist to reduce how hard your account falls in a crash, especially the crash that happens to land the year before you retire. The fund is trading some expected growth for a smoother ride that can be exactly the right trade for you. The question is whether you know you're making it and at what size. So here's the framework. 3 questions using the document you're already legally entitled to, your plan's annual comparative fee chart. Question 1. What's your default fund's actual expense ratio? Closer to the 0.27% average? Or has your plan negotiated something cheaper? Question 2. What's the fund's current stock to bond split? And does that match how much risk you actually choose if you were picking it yourself? Question 3. Is there a plain index fund sitting right next to your default option in that same chart? And if so, what would switching change for your number? Run those 3 checks, and you're no longer guessing whether autopilot is working for you. You're making the same decision the fund's designers made, on purpose, with the actual numbers in front of you instead of by default. Most people think a 401k default is basically investing in the market automatically. The better question isn't whether the default is bad, it's whether you actually know what it costs and what it's betting on. So here's what I'm asking. Pull your plan's fee chart, find your default fund, and look for those 2 numbers. Then comment one of 3 words: cheap, expensive, or confused. If enough people comment confused, the next video will be a walkthrough showing exactly where to find these numbers inside a real 401k menu.